From as early as I can remember, I knew I didn't belong. Not because someone said it out loud, though eventually they did, but because it was stitched into every look, every pause in conversation when I entered the room. My family had a way of making me invisible without ever closing their eyes. I was the oops baby, the child born to my mom as a scared, unmarried 19-year-old. Everyone else in the family came from carefully planned marriages, shared last names, white picket fences, and church weddings. I came from a storm, and even though my mom raised me with everything she could give, they never let either of us forget how much we didn't measure up. Birthdays weren't milestones in my family. They were comparisons. I'd unwrap a shirt and a "we didn't know what you'd like" card while my cousin Evan opened the newest gaming console surrounded by applause. When I placed second at the district spelling bee, I was told, "Well, your cousin won his soccer tournament, so we're going to that." When I got my braces off. That's nice. Anyway, Abby just made the honor roll again. There's something uniquely cruel about being told, over and over, that your best is still disappointing, that no matter how hard you climb, someone else already owns the hill, and you're just embarrassing yourself for trying. At family dinners, I was the one seated at the end of the fold-out kiddie table, even when I was 17. The others laughed and shared stories of ski trips, graduations, and international travels. No one asked me how school was going, even though I was carrying a 4.0 GPA and working part-time after class to afford community college credits on the side. I wanted to speak up sometimes, maybe brag a little, but the few times I tried, the entire room would quiet awkwardly until someone shifted the attention back to Evan or Abby, as if my voice interrupted the regular programming. Christmas was even worse. Everyone else had stockings overflowing with gift cards and monogrammed gadgets. Mine once had a coloring book. I was 15. Mom tried. She always did, but she wasn't invited to most family events anymore. I'd go alone or not at all. She told me not to take it personally, that it was just how they are. But I watched how it broke her down year after year. And I saw how they talked about her when they thought I wasn't listening, how she was a burden or selfish for keeping me. What's funny is, I didn't hate them. Not back then. I just felt tired. Tired of wearing silence like armor. Tired of clapping for others and pretending I didn't mind being unseen. But I also learned how to observe, how to memorize tiny details while sucking in every tiny blow. I collected their smiles, when they weren't toward me, their arrogance, their easy assumption that I would always be beneath them. And somewhere inside me, something hardened and said, "Let them laugh. Let them sit taller. Just wait." By the time I was finishing high school, I knew one thing for sure. The only way they'd remember I existed was if I did something unforgettable. Not loud, not flashy, just irreversible, and they would never see it coming, because invisible people know how to move in silence. If there was a light in that fog of silence and comparison, it was my grandparents. They weren't loud about their love. They didn't post or parade, didn't brag or make speeches, but they saw me, the real me, in a way no one else in the family ever cared to. They didn't care that I was a so-called accident, or that my mom wasn't married. If anything, they cared more because of it. My grandma had this soft gaze she'd always give me when I walked into a room, like I was the person she'd been waiting to see all day. And Grandpa didn't say much, but he always made space for me, at his workbench, at his garden table, on the porch swing next to his old radio. They remembered everything. My spelling bee words, the name of the boy who sat behind me in science class, even how I liked my tea. Every grade card I brought home, Grandpa would pull out his reading glasses with a slow, exaggerated huff, like he was about to review a 10-year investment. Then he'd nod, let out a low whistle, and say, "Looks like the smartest one in the bunch doesn't always make the most noise." That single sentence carried me through entire months at home. They came to every little recital, even when no one else did. When I played second violin, out of tune and nervous in my school orchestra, I remember looking out and seeing Grandma in the third row, clapping like I was headlining at the Met. One time she slipped me a peppermint afterward and whispered, "Sounded like heaven." I knew it didn't, but that wasn't the point. Birthdays with them were quiet and thoughtful. A used book they found with a handwritten note inside saying why they thought I'd love it, a boxed journal with a ribbon, or a simple envelope with $20 and a line of encouragement in my grandpa's messy handwriting. Put this toward your big future. They couldn't afford big gifts, and after a while, they weren't allowed to give them because apparently it made the other cousins feel unequal. That's what one aunt said anyway. So the gifts stopped. But the notes didn't. Inside cards were cramped words, sometimes full paragraphs, telling me how proud they were. How they noticed how hard I worked, how I had something special. And they meant it. I could tell in the way they remembered tiny things I'd long forgotten, or how they'd keep my school photos long after the others threw theirs into overflowing shoeboxes. I'd hear the family complain, behind closed doors, about how grandma's going soft, or how they're wasting time doting on the wrong grandkid, because I wasn't going to amount to much anyway. But my grandparents never repeated those things to me. They protected me quietly, not with shields or speeches, but with consistency, warmth, presence. Looking back, I didn't realize just how much they were giving me until they were gone. Or maybe not gone. Just waiting. Waiting to hand me the keys to something no one else in the family even knew existed. Graduation day was supposed to feel like a triumph, a finish line, but all I felt was hollow. I remember scanning the crowd as they called my name, the sea of faces blending into one giant blur of whoops, camera flashes, and clapping hands. None of it was for me. There was no "that's my girl" echoing from the bleachers. No someone waving wildly holding a sign. Just the scraping sound of my own heels crossing the stage and the polite, brief applause from strangers who didn't know me. My mom had tried to come, but she was recovering from surgery. She cried that morning, apologizing over and over, and I told her it was okay. Truthfully, I'd already expected to walk alone. That was my normal. Still, it stung. No family texts, no posts, no calls. Not even a recycled congrats from my aunts. My cousins were all too busy fighting over internship placements and bragging about summer plans in Europe. But tucked inside the pocket of my graduation gown was something different. Something real. It was a weathered envelope with my full name in Grandpa's handwriting, sealed months before he passed. I waited until I was off stage, in a quiet corner near the back exit of the hall, to open it. My fingers trembled, not out of nerves, but certainty that whatever was inside would change something. Inside was a single square of thick, folded paper with his careful scrawl. It said, "If you're reading this, then you did it. I always knew you would, even when they didn't. Call this number. His name is Mr. Langford. He'll be expecting you. We made sure. Now, build your life, unseen." There was a business card attached. Langford and Shaw, Estate Law Services. I stood there holding it like it was radioactive. At first I didn't even understand. Estate law? What had they made sure of? My grandparents didn't talk about things like money or wills, but the tone of the letter, it felt final, like a curtain being pulled back. And that last line clung to me. Build your life, unseen. I stayed at the ceremony for another hour, took my photo alone in front of the banner, and clapped for people I barely knew as their entire families surged forward with balloons and bouquets. Then I walked the 2 miles home instead of waiting for the bus. I needed the time. My entire body buzzed, like I'd stumbled into the first page of a secret chapter no one else had permission to read. For the first time, I felt something shift. Not in the world, but in me. Not hope. Not yet, but the beginning of possibility. A quiet kind of power, and no one else had the slightest idea what had just begun. I expected a modest inheritance. Maybe a few mementos, something sentimental like Grandpa's war medals, or one of Grandma's hand-woven quilts. I'd even braced myself for disappointment, a symbolic gesture, a quiet, "we wish we could have done more." What I didn't expect was a sealed office, a waiting paralegal, and a man in a charcoal suit who spoke to me like I was someone important. "Miss Evans," he said, "please have a seat. We've been waiting for you." The law office was spotless, glass everywhere and soft jazz humming from somewhere behind the walls. Mr. Langford introduced himself with a firm handshake, then reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a thick, Weathered file folder marked in my grandfather's bold handwriting. Private, for my granddaughter's eyes only. That alone knocked the air out of me. I didn't even know this office existed. None of the family had ever mentioned it. Heck, they barely remembered my birthday most years. But somehow I was walking into a room where my name, not Evan's, not Abby's, was the one they'd been holding on to. He placed a flash drive next to the folder. They wanted you to see the message first. He slid me a laptop, and I pressed play. The screen flickered, and there they were, my grandparents, sitting side by side in their old living room. My grandfather looked thinner than I remembered, but his voice carried that same quiet strength I'd grown up leaning on. "If you're seeing this," he said, "then you already know we never stopped believing in you. We watched how they treated you, how they ignored you, and we said nothing for too long." Grandma nodded, taking his hand. "We always planned to leave something behind for you, but as the years passed, it became clear that leaving things to the rest of the family would only enable more damage, so we changed our minds. Quietly." Grandpa looked into the camera. "Everything we have, every cent, every piece of land, every right to the estate, is yours. Let them think they were smarter, louder, more deserving, but we saw who they really were." And Grandma whispered, "And we saw who you were, even when they didn't." The video ended. I sat there blinking, trying to swallow the lump rising in my throat. Everything?" I asked, barely trusting my own voice. Mr. Langford nodded. "The property, a high-value estate including oil royalties, multiple investment accounts, legal patents in your grandfather's name, totaling roughly $10.3 million. They established a private trust. You're the sole beneficiary, and the only one who even knows it exists." It didn't feel real. I'd grown up being passed over for pizza parties, for hand-me-down shoes, for college rides. And now, I was sitting across from a lawyer telling me I held the keys to everything my grandparents had ever owned. All of it had been hidden behind fake disclaimers and legal smokescreens. The rest of the family assumed Grandpa sold off the land for pennies years ago, and any cash they might have had went toward medical bills. But none of that was true. They had protected it. They had protected me. "When people show you who they are," Grandpa had once said, "believe them. And when you learn who you are, never forget it." I walked out of that office with a woven folder clutched in my hands like it might vanish if I blinked. I didn't cry yet. I didn't smile either. I just walked a little straighter. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt chosen. Everyone thought the estate was long gone. Years back, someone, probably Uncle Dean, started the rumor that Grandpa had sold it to the government for pennies on the dollar. Something about state acquisition and zoning disputes. The rest of the family latched onto the story like it was gospel. Typical. No one had asked questions, just parroted whatever made them feel superior at that year's holiday brunch. But I knew the truth now. The $10 million wasn't tucked inside some bank vault or buried in a mattress. It was buried in paper, land ownership, mineral rights, and tangled old deeds complete with rusted county clerk stamps and dog-eared survey maps. Mr. Langford helped me decode the portfolios one by one. 100-acre lots from old farming parcels, a Victorian estate that looked haunted from the outside but sat on a 10-minute drive from luxury developers, and most shockingly, partial ownership in an oil lease that was still paying dividends. All of it was real. And all of it was mine. There were no social media posts, no dramatic announcements. I didn't stunt on Instagram or roll up to any family parties with a new car. I couldn't even if I wanted to. I still lived in the same modest apartment, drove the same third-hand sedan with a sticking window. Except now, I had a paper trail that could change my life 5 times over. Instead, I did something far more dangerous. I stayed quiet. The first step was protecting it. I established a preservation trust in my grandparents' name, with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. It gave me legal control over the property indefinitely. Then I got to work handling the back taxes. Everything was up to date, but I prepaid 2 years in advance just in case someone got nosy. An empty mailbox and a clean ledger are the best security systems money can't buy for the estate itself, the Victorian one that didn't exist, I filed a maintenance waiver and began slowly restoring pieces of it piece by piece. New locks, reinforced windows, and security cameras. Not because I intended to live there right away, but because it needed to be mine again before I decided what came next. No one in the family had been there in years. If any of them had bothered to even drive by, they might have guessed something was happening. But no one did. They were too busy, crawling over each other for a slice of whatever they assumed was left. Behind, they didn't know the most valuable thing Grandma and Grandpa ever owned was the quiet choice they'd made, to believe in me. And now I was holding it, literally, in my name. Not that they'd ever ask. I could have thrown a parade. I could have turned the estate into the biggest power play they'd ever seen. But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Real power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to exist, and right now, I held all of it. When Grandma passed, the phone calls didn't sound like grief. They sounded like opportunity. It started within hours of the announcement. Aunt Melissa posted a filtered throwback on Facebook, her and Grandma at a brunch they hadn't attended together in years, with a caption that read, "Heaven gained an angel. We gained a legacy." The comments weren't condolences. They were guesses. People asking questions they had no business asking. Speculation turned into obsession before the body was even buried. I stayed quiet. I stayed far. They didn't even ask if I'd be attending the service. There wasn't an invitation so much as a group chat full of logistical chaos. I watched it unfold silently. Uncle Dean wanted to hold a reading of the will, even though he had no idea if one existed. Cousin Evan bragged that Grandma had promised him her antique jewelry set, because apparently a drunken Christmas dinner conversation from 5 years ago counted as a verbal contract. Abby, predictably, asked if anyone knew what bank accounts Grandma used, so we don't waste time calling around. I shouldn't have been shocked. But their ability to twist death into division was impressive. A small memorial was thrown together at a rented funeral home that felt like a banquet hall missing the party. There wasn't a single framed photo of Grandma with me or my mom in the slideshow, not one. They used stock photos of her with roses and birds, rather than any real memories with us. I didn't speak. I sat in the back row, ignored, and watched it all unravel. The murmurs began even before the service ended. "So what about the house? Did you see the inheritance paperwork?" She had to leave something, probably just hadn't told us yet. It was all performance. There was no mourning in that room, just positioning. Then came the real chaos. A week later, I got a late-night call from the estate's security monitoring company. Someone had broken into the house. I already knew who it was before they confirmed. Cousin Evan, Mr. Future Hedge Fund, had apparently heard through the grapevine that Grandma kept a lockbox of diamonds in the fireplace bricks. He brought bolt cutters, a flashlight, and a friend. What he didn't know was that I had cameras installed, motion-triggered, audio-enabled, time-stamped. I watched from my laptop as he skulked through the kitchen, whispering instructions, tripping over a garden hose she used to keep rolled on the porch. He found nothing, because there was nothing in the house for him. Not anymore. The next morning I sent his mom, Aunt Melissa, a very polite email. No accusations, just a screenshot, one frame. Evan's wide-eyed face caught in full color beside a pried-open kitchen drawer. She never responded. But his profile went private within hours. A week later, he reposted something cryptic about family snakes, and what's mine will find its way back to me. Sure. Meanwhile, the arguing continued like a full-blown reality show. Uncles accusing each other of lying, Abby swearing she had text proof that Grandma verbally gave her rights to the estate. Yesterday's alliance dissolved into today's threats. I heard rumors that someone tried to file a claim before probate even opened. Let them fight. Let them rot each other out. What they didn't realize was that the will, the real one, had already been cleared. And not one of their names appeared in even the smallest print. But my name? It was signed in ink. Bold. Undeniable. I was the ghost standing behind the curtains, pressing record, watching my family tear themselves apart over something they were never getting. And the best part? They still had no clue who was holding the match while they danced in gasoline. 3 months of silence. That's how long it took before someone remembered my number. The text came from Aunt Melissa. Hey, sweetie. We've been meaning to catch up. Family dinner this Saturday. Just us, you should come. We'd love your insight on a few things Grandma's passing. You always were so smart about paperwork. I stared at the screen expressionless. It didn't even try to sound real. For years, they treated me like background noise, an afterthought at best. Suddenly, now that things weren't shaking out how they wanted, I was important again? I could smell the desperation in every word. I didn't respond right away. I let a full day pass before I answered with a simple, "Sure, I'll be there." They wanted a performance. I'd give them one. I showed up 15 minutes late. On purpose, Uncle Dean opened the door, fake smile already stapled to his face. "Look who finally decided to join the family," he said, stepping aside. I walked in. Every head turned. For once, no one rushed to take the spotlight. They were watching me, measuring. Dinner was set up like a negotiation table. No tablecloths, just place settings, stiff smiles, and centerpieces that looked like they'd been pulled from a seasonal sale bin. Abby wore pearls. Evan stood when I walked in, like we were at some mock court hearing. It was all so transparent and pathetic. They served chicken, wine, and guilt. Melissa cleared her throat halfway through the meal and said in her best maternal voice, "So, we've been going through the paperwork, but you know how confusing all those legal words are?" Her tone dripped sugar. I didn't touch it. Dean leaned in. "We figured, being the one with the best head on your shoulders, you might help clear things up. You know, break it down. Keep everything fair." There it was. Fair. Fair. Like my birthday coloring book at 15. Fair, like Grandma having to stop giving me thoughtful cards because it wasn't equal. Fair, like being erased my entire life until convenient. I smiled. "What are you hoping I'll say?" They paused. "Well, just tell us if you've heard anything. Any updates?" Abby said, swirling her wine. "You probably caught wind of something through that lawyer guy. I mean, everyone assumed the estate would naturally be split." I looked at her. "Naturally?" Evan cut in. "You don't have to be defensive. We're family. We're just clarifying. This wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush in linen napkins. They thought I was soft. That maybe deep down I still craved their approval. Maybe if they smiled enough, I'd fold out of gratitude just to feel like one of them again. But they didn't know I'd already seen the contracts, signed the deeds, held the documents in my hands. They didn't know everything they were clawing toward used to belong to my side of the table all along. I wiped my mouth, set my fork down gently, and said, "I appreciate you thinking of me. Really. Let me know if you need help finding an estate attorney who's not imaginary." Then I stood, thanked them for the meal, and walked out. Let them guess. Let them stew. I wasn't clarifying anything. Manipulation only works on people who still want something from you. I didn't. Not anymore. It's amazing how easy it is to play dumb when you've spent your whole life being seen that way. The dinner dragged on, but I stayed. Not because I owed them anything, because I wanted to watch. I was curious just how far they'd go in their little fantasy of entitlement. Apparently, pretty far. Abby asked if I had finally moved out of that shoebox apartment, then laughed before I could answer. I smiled like I didn't hear the shot. Evan, fake casual, leaned over and said, "I bet you're still renting, right?" I nodded. He winked at the table, smug. His wife whispered something I didn't catch, but it ended in a snort. They thought I was broke. Powerless. They thought I'd come crawling with questions when I couldn't scrape by. They had no idea I had walked into that dinner controlling every single item they were about to fight over. And I wasn't saying a word. Dean started talking about liquidating assets, and Melissa went on about how Airbnb money could really help the younger cousins get on their feet. Abby pulled out a spreadsheet, an actual printed spreadsheet, and began listing items to be split accordingly between immediate heirs. No one blinked when she said heirs. They weren't, wondering if the inheritance would come through. They were wondering how they'd divvy it up once it did. I sat there taking mental notes while they brainstormed investments with someone else's money. What to renovate, which bank accounts might need consolidating. Melissa suggested turning the estate into a wedding venue. Dean wanted to offer it to a city councilman for a potential partnership. Evan said he'd take the upstairs master while the cousins could pull straws for the guest rooms. Abby offered to take Grandma's jewelry collection for safekeeping. All of it, they said all of it, in front of me, not to me. Like I was just a dusty chair no one removed from the room. No one asked what I thought. Why would they? They thought I had nothing. I picked at the edges of my napkin, nodded, listened, smiled every now and then like I was flattered to be included. I never once corrected them. I even let Abby add my room from the old house to the sleeping chart. Apparently, Evan's youngest would need his own personal space on holidays. They had completely written me out of the future, just like they had the past. And still, I didn't say a word. Why would I? Watching them sort through a fortune they'd never touch, make plans for rooms they'd never enter, and assign jewelry that was already under a totally different owner's trust? It was better than any monologue I could have delivered. They wanted to think I was renting? Sure. They wanted to believe I was broke, scrambling, grateful just to have a seat? Perfect. Power doesn't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes it sits silently at the corner of the table, smiling, memorizing. Because the truth is, if you let people speak long enough, they'll always tell you who they are. And that night, they told me everything. All I had to do was sit back, nod, and let the script play out. Because I already knew exactly how the story ended. They just hadn't read the final chapter yet. While they plotted and pecked and played financial make-believe over dinner, I already had everything locked down, tied tighter than Fort Knox. The estate transfer had been initiated. 2 weeks after I met with Mr. Langford. The preservation trust wasn't just a holding place, it was a firewall, irrevocable, bulletproof. Every deed, every parcel of land, every mineral right and royalty check had been transferred under a name they didn't recognize. My name was on nothing directly. I wasn't careless. If someone searched, all they'd find was a quiet little non-profit-sounding entity with no social presence, no online footprint, a whisper dressed as a whisper. I didn't do it to hide. I did it to protect what my grandparents built. If I was going to honor them, I had to make sure what they left behind didn't rot in the hands of people who'd already sold pieces of it in their heads like parasites circling meat. They didn't love the land. They didn't value the work. They wanted liquidation. They saw inheritance as a cash-out. But I saw it as a legacy. And legacies, real ones, aren't meant to be sold off in bits and pieces the moment a coffin is shut. They never earned it. They didn't sit in Grandma's sunroom watching her cut coupons. They didn't walk the property line with Grandpa every summer, checking the gate locks after storms. They didn't see the bills pile up when Grandma's medications doubled. They didn't hear the bone-deep disappointment in her voice when she found out Evan used her name to open a credit card, then blamed it on her memory issues. No, that history didn't belong to them. So I moved smart, signed, notarized, and refiled every major asset through the Preservation Trust. I appointed a secondary trustee to make sure the estate could never be touched without clear legal grounds and full documentation. I left them no loopholes, no ladders to climb through, just silence. And as for the money, because yes, they were right, there was money, I tucked a portion of the royalties into a charitable endowment. Not in my name, not even the trust's name, in my grandparents' names, specifically for a children's literacy foundation. The application letter I submitted said, "Because someone once believed in my story before I knew how to write it. Let this help children whose voices haven't been heard." That was for Grandma. She'd spent years volunteering at the public library while the family teased her for wasting her time. Told her she was too tired to make a difference, but I remembered the books she'd bring me. The crumpled library receipts she treated like bookmarks. The way she said, "Words are armor, baby. Learn to use them." So I did. I wasn't just watching from the sidelines anymore. I was rewriting every line they thought they owned. Not out of vengeance, from preservation. Quiet revolution. They still believed they were just waiting for the will to be processed, that probate would soon unlock their prize. I let them think that. Let them plan their upgrades and renovations and early morning yoga sessions on the estate lawn, because I had no need to outshout them. The ink was already dry. The property was protected. The future was spoken for. And they didn't even know the doors they were trying to barge through weren't even connected to the house anymore. Eventually, curiosity got the better of them. Dean was the first to reach out to Mr. Langford. probably assuming he'd charm his way into details or manipulate the truth out of legal thin air. He keyed in phrases like family representative and managing inheritor. I know this because Langford called me the moment the call ended, not to tattle, but to prepare me for the tidal wave coming. It wasn't a wave, it was an eruption. After Langford calmly explained that there would be no estate division, no reading of the will involving multiple beneficiaries, and most importantly, no assets designated to any family member other than one sole heir, the text started. Not to him, to me. Dean sent the first message. This has to be a misunderstanding. I'm happy to sit down and come up with a fair solution. Let's not turn this into a legal mess. Translation. I thought I was getting something. Now I'm panicking, but I still think I can bully you into sharing. Abby followed with a guilt-laced classic. Grandma wouldn't have wanted this kind of division. We're family. Let's fix this before it gets ugly. Funny. Grandma also wouldn't have wanted her beloved heirs to steal from her medicine cabinet or sell off her furniture before the service. Then, there was Evan. He didn't text. He called. He spoke fast, voice trembling at the edge of forced calm. At first it was casual. Wow, things got complicated, huh? Then confessional. I'm actually in a bit of a tight spot financially. Then outright pathetic. You wouldn't happen to have a few thousand you could loan me just until I sort things out. I mean, considering how close we all are. I remember staring at the screen, his name glowing as he rambled, trying to remember a time Evan had ever called me for anything other than to make himself feel bigger. I let him speak. Then, when he paused to breathe, I said, I don't think I'm the right person to help with that. Silence. Swallowed pride crackled on the other end. He mumbled something about catching up later and hung up. That's when the real unraveling began. Screenshots from the family chat group thread started surfacing. Melissa snapping at Dean. This is your fault for trusting that lawyer. Abby accusing Evan of scheming behind everyone's back. Someone even suggested digging into the trust legality, assuming it could be contested if they proved undue influence, whatever that meant to them. They were flailing. Threats turned into blame. Blame turned into finger-pointing. Everyone convinced someone else had to be getting something, because the possibility that no one was, except the person they'd ignored their whole lives, was too much to accept. They couldn't say my name aloud without choking on it. But oh, how badly they wanted what it came attached to, and all I had to do was nothing. Let them implode. Let them stew in the pot they salted. They'd spent every holiday reminding me I wasn't one of them. Now, they were finally right. I wasn't. I was in a category of my own, the only one Grandma and Grandpa had chosen, deliberately, legally, and without room for confusion. Of course it wasn't going to end quietly, not with cousins like mine. Abby, the family's golden child, the one everyone swore would be a lawyer, a model, or a miracle, decided she wasn't going to take the inheritance news lying down. She always believed things were hers by default, that her future came pre-packaged in entitlement and gold-trimmed monograms. So when she found out she'd been completely cut out of the estate, she didn't cry. She didn't grieve, she lawyered up. She filed a formal challenge in probate court under the claim of undue influence. Her angle? That I somehow manipulated our grandparents into giving me everything, that their decision was made under duress, that it was unnatural, and that they were clearly not of sound mind. They called it the DeShields family dispute. It made the local news in small headlines, just enough to embarrass themselves, but not enough to matter. She gave interviews, vague and polished, talking about how money had twisted once close relationships, and that she was seeking justice, not revenge. I think she thought someone would rally behind her, that the public would cry out for the perfect blonde niece wronged by a scheming outlier. I stayed silent. Perfectly quiet, let her burn gas on press and petitions. Let her spend $5,000 on every round of legal paperwork while talking about principles. My lawyer, Mr. Langford, stayed calm throughout. Patient, professional, and then he dropped the bomb. In court, he delivered a neatly bound folder, one Abby hadn't expected. Attached to it was a hard drive. Inside was my grandparents' recorded message, the one they filmed before signing the will, explaining exactly why the estate was going to me and no one else. But more than that, I had included supplemental footage, clips from family dinners, cell phone videos, time-stamped screenshots, conversations recorded legally in public rooms, moments when Abby mocked Grandma's handwriting, called her senile, audio of her telling Evan that whatever's left, we'll just grab it before the will's even cold, and, even better, footage of the estate dinner a few weeks earlier. The night they invited me like a lamb to the slaughter, smiled in my face, and talked openly about divvying my inheritance while I sat there renting. The judge saw it all. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. He dismissed her claim with quiet confidence, noting that the level of documentation surrounding the trust was exceptionally thorough, and that the motives of the deceased were clear, well stated and fully supported by corroborating behavior. Translation? She had no case, and everyone now had evidence to confirm exactly why. Abby left court shaking. The press didn't call back after that. Evan went dark online. Melissa posted a cryptic Bible verse about those who reap what they sow. The others faded out. Angry, bitter, embarrassed. That's the thing about people who are used to attention. They fall apart when they realize the spotlight isn't on them anymore. I never needed a fight. I just needed the truth. And when the truth came wrapped in receipts, it was louder than Abby ever could be. They spent years telling me I wasn't family enough. But when it really mattered, I was the only one trusted with the legacy they thought they were entitled to. And in the end, all their noise, threats, and righteous indignation looked a lot like desperation in the face of silence that didn't break. By the time the dust settled, they'd stopped calling me. Not because they had accepted the truth. No, they were just regrouping. Circling in silence like vultures too tired to flap their wings, but still watching for something to drop. So I gave them a little performance. I sent out tasteful, embossed invitations to a private estate liquidation event, formal enough to pique their curiosity. The kind of thing that promised opportunity disguised as civility. Of course, I used my attorney's assistant as the point of contact, and the estate's official trust name as the return sender. No mention of me. The invitation merely read, "A final review of remaining items and property assets. Qualified family only." Like clockwork, they responded. All of them. That Saturday was the first time since Grandma's funeral that everyone showed up wearing their best masks. Fake grief, fake nostalgia, and behind it, very real greed. I watched from upstairs, behind a silk curtain, as they gathered at the front gate like moths convinced they saw firelight. The estate had been cleaned up, polished like new. Ivy trimmed, fountain flowing, walkways repaved. A champagne cart waited near the entry arch. Soft music played through surround. Speakers, the same classical playlist Grandma used to hum to when she did her puzzles at sunrise. They noticed the change immediately, and they noticed the Tesla. It sat gleaming at the base of the Circle Drive. My Tesla, though registered to the trust, of course. The one they all assumed belonged to a business partner or some buyer here to scope out the good stuff early. They whispered about who might get the piano. Demanded to know what happened to the silverware set from the 70s. Melissa cornered the groundskeeper, who was actually a hired actor, and asked if the auctioneer would be taking cash or certified check. They walked around like tourists with deep wallets, tugging drawers open when no one was looking, snapping discreet photos of rugs and antique lamps, pointing at walls they thought they still had a claim to. I let them wander for 30 minutes. Then I came out through the double doors and stood at the base of the front steps. Quiet, confident, holding a chilled glass of champagne I hadn't even sipped. They froze when they saw me. Dean blinked like he'd seen a ghost. Abby's jaw clenched. Evan dropped his conversation mid-sentence and tried to recover by pretending he knew I'd be there all along. I raised my glass slightly and said, "Welcome." No one spoke, so I delivered the line I'd waited my whole life to say. Nothing is for sale. The air cracked around the statement, like someone had turned off the lights in the middle of a stage play. "You were invited," I continued, "so you'd stop asking. So you'd see with your own eyes that this place is cared for, that the will is final, that the story has already ended. You're not heirs. Your guests. And this is your last tour. Melissa fumbled out but we were told. You weren't told a thing. I cut gently. You decided what you wanted to believe. This isn't an estate sale. It's a farewell. I let the words hang there. Then I turned, walked back up the steps, and closed the doors behind me. Locked them quietly. Inside, I sat down by the fireplace and listened as they shuffled around, still stammering in disbelief, searching each other's eyes for someone to blame, but no longer bold enough to knock. There was no treasure map. No final shot. Just a clear message, sent without apology. The inheritance they'd tried to steal wasn't even on the market, and some legacies aren't up for bidding. After everything, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt quiet, loved, waiting, the kind of space that had outlived every insult whispered about it. The kind of home you stepped into and felt wrapped in a memory, not haunted by ghosts. Maybe that's what Grandma had always known, that some places don't ask to be protected. They just need someone to look past the wallpaper and see the roots. So I moved in, not all at once. I took my time, brought in my boxes slowly, touched every windowsill, every doorknob. There was always something familiar in the scent of the floor polish mixed with old books and lavender. Like she was still moving through the halls just ahead of me. I started with the room everyone used to mock. Her reading nook. They'd call it dreary, outdated, Grandma's hoarder hideaway. But I rebuilt it like it was sacred. I repainted the walls the same muted blue she once described as soft as a summer storm, reshelved the books in the same odd, non-linear way she liked, with poetry next to cookbooks and classics side by side with gardening guides. Her armchair sat snug in the corner facing the bay window, cushions reupholstered but still slightly squished from years of love. Her teacups, small porcelain slightly chipped at the rim, lined the side table. I even kept the square tin she used to fill with loose peppermint and cinnamon sticks. It still carried a faint scent of both when I opened it. Every morning for a week, I sat there like she used to, reading the paper or just watching the neighborhood wake up. It became my sanctuary, too. The first place I went to breathe before facing the rest of the world. And then, one rainy Sunday, I leaned back in her chair and felt something knock gently in the side panel. Curious, I pulled the cushion aside and spotted a seam I'd never noticed before, barely a hairline crack in the wood. I slid my fingers along the edges, pushed a little, and the panel popped open. Inside was a folded sheet of cream stationery, yellowed just slightly with time. My breath caught before I even opened it. Her handwriting, unmistakable, flowed across the page in ink pressed deep by a deliberate hand. It read, "If you found this, it means you chose care over chaos, that you saw the soul of this house buried beneath the noise. I never doubted you would. They'll forget us, twist the story, maybe even curse our name. Let them. You're the beating heart of everything we spent our lives building. No mansion or stock account ever mattered more than this. You. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I knew you'd protect us. Love always. Grandma." I sat for a long time, holding that letter like it might disappear if I blinked. And in that moment, I didn't feel victorious. Not powerful. Not better. I just felt safe. Like the storm had finally passed. And everything I'd carried had a place to rest. After everything, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt quiet, loved, waiting. The kind of space that had outlived every insult whispered about it. The kind of home you stepped into and felt wrapped in a memory, not haunted by ghosts. Maybe that's what Grandma had always known, that some places don't ask to be protected. They just need someone to look past the wallpaper and see the roots. So I moved in. Not all at once. I took my time, brought in my boxes slowly, touched every windowsill, every doorknob. There was always something familiar in the scent of the floor polish mixed with old books and lavender, like she was still moving through the halls just ahead of me. I started with the room everyone used to mock, her reading nook. They'd call it dreary, outdated Grandma's hoarder hideaway, but I rebuilt it like it was sacred. I repainted the walls the same muted blue she once described as soft as a summer storm, reshelved the books in the same odd, non-linear way she liked, with poetry next to cookbooks and classics side by side with gardening guides. Her armchair sat snug in the corner facing the bay window, cushions reupholstered but still slightly squished from years of love. Her teacups, small, porcelain, slightly chipped at the rim, lined the side table. I even kept the square tin she used to fill with loose peppermint and cinnamon sticks. It still carried a faint scent of both when I opened it. Every morning for a week, I sat there like she used to, reading the paper or just watching the neighborhood wake up. It became my sanctuary too, the first place I went to breathe before facing the rest of the world. And then, one rainy Sunday, I leaned back in her chair and felt something knock gently in the side panel. Curious, I pulled the cushion aside and spotted a seam I'd never noticed before, barely a hairline crack in the wood. I slid my fingers along the edges, pushed a little, and the panel popped open. Inside was a folded sheet of cream stationery, yellowed just slightly with time. My breath caught before I even opened it. Her handwriting, unmistakable, flowed across the page in ink pressed deep by a deliberate hand. It read, "If you found this, it means you chose care over chaos. That you saw the soul of this house buried beneath the noise. I never doubted you would. They'll forget us, twist the story, maybe even curse our name. Let them. You're the beating heart of everything we spent our lives building. No mansion or stock account ever mattered more than this. You. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I knew you'd protect us. Love, always. Grandma." I sat for a long time, holding that letter like it might disappear if I blinked. And in that moment, I didn't feel victorious. Not powerful, not better. I just felt safe. Like the storm had finally passed, and everything I'd carried had a place to rest.